The last time I let my guard down around my sister, I was standing in a white dress in my parents' backyard, showing her the ring I thought she helped Matthew pick out. I thought it was a shared victory, me, the steady one, the dependable one, finally getting something beautiful. Veronica smiled, hugged me, told me I deserved the world. I believed her. Of course I did. She was my sister. Growing up, I was the quiet one, the one who followed rules, who showed up on time, who didn't need fixing. Veronica. She was the exciting one. The kind of kid who came home late, always had a story, always had an excuse. But somehow that made her the star. At every family dinner, all eyes were on her. My job was just to be the good one. You'd be surprised how invisible that makes you feel. When I joined the Navy at 18, it wasn't out of rebellion. It was survival. College wasn't in the cards financially, and I didn't have time to chase some dreamy liberal arts degree. I needed structure, a paycheck, a future. The Navy gave me all three, plus a backbone no one in my family had prepared me to grow. Veronica rolled her eyes when I enlisted, said I'd come back rough around the edges. I didn't bother correcting her. She always liked her version of things better. Over the years, I missed a lot, birthdays, holidays, the random Sunday dinners that made up the fabric of normal family life. But I sent gifts. I called when I could. I showed up when I was on leave. And every time I did, I felt more like a guest than a daughter. It's hard to explain what it's like to watch your sister get praised for trying while you get ignored for achieving. Then came Matthew. I met him at a defense industry gala my unit helped coordinate. He was a contractor, clean-cut sharp, but not full of himself. We talked shop for a bit, missiles logistics, the usual flirty battlefield stuff. Then we talked about dogs and barbecue. And weirdly, I didn't feel like I had to prove anything. He knew what deployments looked like. He didn't flinch at long hours or acronyms. He didn't say, "That's hot," when I told him I worked in logistics command. He just got it. Our relationship moved fast, but nothing felt rushed. For once, I didn't have to translate my life for someone. Matthew was thoughtful, funny, surprisingly humble for a guy with a lakeside condo. He met my family after a few months. They were smitten. Even Veronica looked impressed. And trust me, that woman doesn't get impressed. She teased me, said, finally, "Someone who can handle your schedule." I laughed. So did Matthew. I should have known right then. We got engaged the following year. Nothing flashy, no fireworks or flash mobs. Just a quiet night on a pier, a ring, and a man who made me believe that maybe, just maybe, I could have both. Service and stability, structure and softness. Veronica offered to help plan the wedding, said it was the least she could do since I was always gone. She picked up calls when I was on base, met vendors when I was at briefings. She sent me photos of flowers and cake samples. Sometimes I'd thank her, and she'd brush it off with, "Hey, you're serving the country. I'm just picking napkins." Everyone thought she was being sweet, supportive, selfless. Looking back now, I think she was just making space for herself in the middle of my life. There was this night, maybe 3 months before the wedding. I was on leave and came home to help finalize some details. Veronica and Matthew were just finishing up a cake tasting session in the kitchen when I walked in. I asked how it went. She said, "He has surprisingly good taste," then winked. I laughed, but something twisted in my stomach. I told myself I was being paranoid. After all, she was helping, going above and beyond. Why ruin it with suspicion? You know what's wild? People always say, I had no idea, like betrayal shows up wearing a mask. But most of the time you do know. You just don't want to deal with what knowing means. So you shove it down, pour a drink, and say thank you. And I did. Over and over again. If you're still watching, drop a quick comment below. Just say hey, or tell me if you've ever had a family member let you down in a way you didn't see coming. And hit that subscribe button if you want to see how this all unravels. Thanks for being here, it means more than you know. The day we printed the invitations, I remember watching Veronica scroll through designs like she was the one getting married. She corrected me on the venue address. She told Matthew he needed to get a better suit. My mom even said, "Honestly, I don't know what we'd do without your sister." No one noticed that I barely spoke the entire afternoon. I'd spent my life believing that being dependable was enough, that showing up, doing the right thing, working hard, all that would add up to security, to love, to being chosen. But in that moment, watching my sister laugh with my fiancé in my parents' kitchen, I realized something dangerous. I was the only one who thought I was safe. And that's where it really started. I didn't say anything when Veronica handed Matthew a fork during that cake tasting and wiped something off his chin like she'd done it 100 times before. I just stood there pretending not to notice the weird weight in the room. Pretending was easier. That's something the military teaches you without saying it, how to put your discomfort in a box and keep moving. A week later, I was back on base, knee-deep in a logistics readiness review that had already gone sideways before I even stepped into the briefing. 48-hour shifts, zero sleep, broken comms from a supplier in Bahrain. My entire mental bandwidth was stretched between fixing that and checking in with the commanding officer about a security drill that just got bumped up a month. Somewhere in between, I got a text from Veronica asking if I preferred gold or silver for the table centerpieces. I stared at my phone for 10 seconds, put it back in my pocket, and never replied. That was the rhythm. I juggled duty rosters while she juggled wedding vendors. She FaceTimed me from a flower shop once while I was crouched behind a Humvee double-checking inventory tags before a deployment loadout. "Do you like these roses?" she asked, panning the screen across a wall of pink. I said, "Sure," and dropped the call when I heard shouting on the other end of the hangar. I could feel myself getting further away from it all. From the planning. From the people in it. From the version of myself who thought having a white dress and a ring would finally make her feel like she wasn't the second choice. But every time I questioned it, I reminded myself this is the life I chose. I wasn't built for weekends off or Pinterest boards. I was built for briefing binders and 10-minute meals eaten out of MRE pouches. Matthew knew that when we met. He'd even said once, "I respect how you show up for the mission, no matter what." I replayed that line in my head every time I had to miss a tasting, a fitting, or some family brunch my mom insisted was crucial. What no one tells you is how easy it is to confuse supportive with available. Matthew never argued. He never said I was gone too much. He just started turning to Veronica for updates, for input, for presence. It made sense on paper. She was there. I wasn't. She called it helping. I called it slow motion replacement. One afternoon, I flew in for a quick weekend leave. I wanted to surprise Matthew and catch up. His building had a secure lobby, so I called him from outside. He didn't pick up. After the third call, I texted, "Hey, I'm downstairs." 2 minutes later, Veronica opened the door. She looked startled, not guilty, just like someone caught off guard in a way she hadn't planned for. "What are you doing here?" she asked, like I'd crashed her plans. I brushed it off, told her I just landed, and wanted to surprise Matthew. She smiled too quickly. "Oh, he just stepped out to grab lunch. Should be back soon." She let me in. His apartment smelled like her perfume. That powdery, expensive kind she only wore to dinners or dates. I didn't ask. I just sat on the couch and waited, flipping through a military logistics report on my phone, pretending I wasn't tracking the time. 32 minutes later, Matthew walked in with 2 drinks from the coffee shop downstairs and only 1 sandwich. He froze, then gave me the fakest smile I've ever seen on a man who used to trace my spine in bed like I was made of glass. Veronica got up too fast, said she had to run. Something about a hair appointment. She grabbed her purse but left her sunglasses on the table. I didn't mention it. Neither did Matthew. That night, we went to dinner like nothing happened. I asked about the cake. He said it was coming along. I asked about the playlist. He said Veronica had ideas. I asked if we were okay. He said, "Of course we are," then kissed my forehead instead of my lips. I flew out the next morning before sunrise and cried on the plane, not because I thought he was cheating, but because for the first time I wasn't sure if I cared enough to fight it. A month passed, then 2. I buried myself in a field exercise that lasted 3 weeks and ended with half our team sleeping in shipping containers. I came home filthy sleep-deprived and 10 pounds lighter. Veronica had emailed me the final guest list and a color-coded seating chart. Matthew had forwarded me an updated menu with a note. "Let me know what you think, but I already told the caterer to move forward." I stared at that sentence for a long time. "Let me know what you think, but I already told the caterer to move forward." There it was. A decision that looked like a courtesy, a gesture that was really just a formality, like I was a box being CC'd, not the bride. I showed up to my final dress fitting alone. The sales associate offered me champagne. I declined. She zipped me up and pinned the sides, then asked, "Do you want to FaceTime someone? Usually people call their mom or sister around now." I smiled. "No, I'm good." I wasn't, but I'd gotten very good at pretending. When I came back to the base that evening, I walked straight past the admin room, out to the open lot where our vehicles were parked, and just stood there staring at the sky. My CO saw me and said, "Rough week." I laughed. Just one short dry sound. Rough decade. He nodded like he understood even if he didn't. Then he said something that stuck. "If you're not sure what you're looking at, look at who's standing beside you." I didn't sleep much that night. By the next morning, I knew I had to stop pretending I was still in control of something that clearly wasn't mine anymore. I didn't talk to anyone for 3 days after that. I showed up to duty, ran drills, filed reports. I ate in silence, showered in silence, drove in silence. I was surrounded by people, but I may as well have been on the dark side of the moon. And the whole time, one sentence just kept looping in my head. If you're not sure what you're looking at, look at who's standing beside you. Every time I replayed the last 6 months, the picture got clearer. Veronica was always beside Matthew, picking up dry cleaning, meeting vendors, coordinating delivery schedules. My mother even mentioned once, "Your sister's been a lifesaver. Matthew would be lost without her." I thought it was just casual praise. It wasn't. It was a warning I didn't know how to hear. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't even tell my best friend on base. I wanted proof, not paranoia. The Navy taught me that. Don't react, don't speculate. Confirm the target before you pull the trigger. So I waited. I started paying attention to the things I'd been too tired or too trusting to notice. Like how Matthew used to call me every night when I was away, and now it was once every few days sometimes with Veronica's voice in the background. Or how she'd text me little updates like, "Matt says hi," instead of letting him do it himself. Or how she posted a photo of the two of them at a wine tasting on her Instagram with the caption, "Some pairings are just perfect." I was tagged. I wasn't invited. One evening, after a 14-hour shift, I came back to the barracks and found a voicemail from my mom. She sounded chipper. "Just wanted to say how lucky you are to have a sister like Veronica. Honestly, sweetheart, she's been holding this whole thing together while you've been off doing your Navy stuff." My Navy stuff. That was the moment I stopped giving anyone the benefit of the doubt. A week later, I requested a last-minute leave. Nothing dramatic, just a long weekend to handle wedding logistics. My CO raised an eyebrow but signed off. I booked a flight, didn't tell anyone, and showed up unannounced at Matthew's condo on a Friday morning. He wasn't there, but her car was. I didn't knock. I didn't text. I stood in the parking lot for a full 5 minutes, just breathing. Then I walked to a nearby cafe, sat by the window, and waited. I had my laptop with me, answered a few emails, watched the door. At 11:14 a.m., they came out together. She was wearing leggings and one of his old college sweatshirts. He was carrying 2 coffees. They didn't look nervous. They looked normal, comfortable. Like people who had routines, like people who weren't hiding. I didn't make a scene. I didn't yell. I just stood up, walked out, and crossed the sidewalk. Veronica saw me first. Her mouth actually dropped open. She covered it with her hand like she was in a movie. Matthew froze. He didn't even say my name, just stared at me like I was the problem. I looked at them, two people I trusted. Two people who were now clearly they, and asked one question. How long has this been happening? Veronica stammered something about, it's not what it looks like. Matthew whispered, we were going to talk to you. I laughed. Not loud, just that same dry sound from before. You mean after the honeymoon? No one answered. I nodded, turned around, and walked straight back to the airport without looking back once. On the flight, I stared at the seat in front of me and thought about all the ways I could fall apart. Cry in public, call my mom and scream, rip the ring off and throw it down the aisle. But none of that felt satisfying. None of that would fix the real problem, because this wasn't just about a man. It wasn't even about my sister. It was about a lifetime of being expected to accept less. Less attention, less care, less protection, just because I was the strong one, the responsible one, the one who never needed anything. Well, I needed something now. And nobody showed up. When I landed, I called the venue and canceled the wedding. The woman on the phone said she was sorry. I didn't answer. I called the florist, the band, the caterer. I called the dress boutique and told them to donate the damn thing. Then I called my bank and disputed the remaining charges on my card. It wasn't about the money. It was about erasing anything that had Veronica's fingerprints on it. I didn't talk to Matthew. He didn't try to talk to me. Veronica sent one message a few days later. You'll understand someday. I hope you can forgive us. I left it on read. Back at base, I didn't tell anyone what happened. I just got back to work. Filed paperwork, ran drills, gave orders, ate bad chow, and sat through long debriefs. People assumed I was just exhausted from wedding stuff. I let them think that. But inside I was done pretending. One night around midnight, I sat alone in the break room with a vending machine dinner and a report due in the morning. I looked at my reflection in the microwave door and said out loud, this is the last time I let family break me. And the wildest part, I meant it. I didn't expect an apology from Veronica, but I figured my parents might at least ask if I was okay. They didn't. What I got instead was a voicemail from my mom 2 days after I canceled the wedding. She sounded annoyed, like I'd forgotten to return a casserole dish. I just heard from Veronica. Is it true you called off the wedding, Allison? I wish you'd talk to us first. This could have been handled more privately. Handled? Like it was a PR issue. Like my sister sleeping with my fiancé was some messy family drama that needed a mop and a press release. Not once in the entire 2-minute message did she ask me how I felt. Not once did she say that wasn't okay. Not once did she even say, I'm sorry. I didn't call her back. The next day, my dad texted, one line, you should talk to your sister. Family is complicated, but it's still family. I stared at the screen for a solid minute before putting my phone face down on my desk. Complicated. That's the word people use when they don't want to say wrong. When they want to smooth over betrayal, like it's just a personality clash. Veronica hadn't stolen my car or borrowed a sweater without asking. She'd broken something that wasn't hers. And now the people who raised me were telling me to make peace with it. I'd spent my whole life being the easy one, the calm one, the we don't worry about her one. I didn't drink in high school. I never got suspended. I joined the damn military. And still, somehow, when it came down to loyalty, they chose her. I wasn't angry, not in the way people think. I didn't throw things or scream into a pillow. It was quieter than that. It was this deep, bone-level understanding that I wasn't actually part of the family the way I thought I was. I'd been playing a role, the reliable one, the background sister, the one who didn't need defending because she could handle it. So I handled it. I moved out of my off-base apartment and into temporary Navy housing while I figured out my next assignment. I boxed up everything that reminded me of the wedding, the framed photo from our engagement dinner, the planner Veronica had gifted me with handwritten notes, the candles my mom insisted would make the ceremony feel warmer. All of it went into a donation bin. when I told my commanding officer what happened only because I needed to adjust my emergency contact info. He blinked and said, "You're handling this well. I said I've had practice. I thought that would be the end of it. Burn the bridge, move on." But people like Veronica don't walk away. They circle back. It started with her sending me a peace offering, a spa gift card, and a handwritten note that said, "For your self-care. I hope we can rebuild someday. Love you always, V." I threw it in the trash without opening the envelope. Then came my mother, who showed up on base unannounced, which, by the way, is not something you do at a military installation unless you want to be stopped at the gate and asked questions you don't have answers to. She waited outside the visitor center for almost 2 hours before I agreed to see her. She looked tired, like the situation had aged her. I didn't feel bad about it. "Allison," she started. "I know you're hurt, are you?" I asked. She sighed like I was being difficult. "This didn't need to be public. The way you canceled everything, the way you disappeared." "Disappeared," I said. "I'm serving the country, not hiding in a cave." Her voice dropped into that condescending mom tone she used when I was 12. "You've always been so proud, so independent, and I respect that. But forgiveness is also strength." I laughed. "Just once. You know what's not strength? Letting someone walk all over you because they share your DNA." She didn't like that. She pulled out the line they always use. "We're still family." "No," I said. "You're still her family. I was just the one who didn't make waves." We sat in silence for a minute. Then she said something I'll never forget. "You've always had the Navy. Veronica, she needed more from us." That was it, the entire logic of my family in one sentence. Because I was strong, I didn't need support. Because she was messy, she earned more grace. I stood up. "Thanks for confirming." She opened her mouth like she was going to argue, then thought better of it. She left without another word. After that, I didn't hear from any of them for months. Not my mom, not my dad, definitely not Veronica. The silence should have felt lonely, but it didn't. It felt like breathing room. Work picked up. I got orders for a short-term assignment overseas, logistics consulting for a joint force operation, the kind of job that required long hours, high stakes, and someone who didn't fold under pressure. Funny how suddenly, I was exactly the kind of person people relied on again. One night, after a particularly brutal 14-hour stretch, I stopped by the on-base commissary for a sad microwave dinner. As I was leaving, a younger officer I barely knew tapped me on the arm. "Hey, Lieutenant Reed. Just wanted to say, that thing with your fiancé, I heard a little about it. You handled that like a damn pro." I blinked. "Thanks, I guess." He nodded. "We need more women like that in the service." I walked to my car in the dark and sat in the driver's seat for a long time before turning the key. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel betrayed. I felt clear. I didn't tell anyone the full story, not even the people I worked with every day. They saw the wedding ring disappear and figured something happened. But nobody pried. In the military, people respect silence, mostly because they know how much pain can hide behind it. On paper, I was fine. I showed up, hit deadlines, took assignments no one wanted. My performance evals were solid. I volunteered for deployments that others tried to dodge. I leaned all the way in. The truth is, when you've been gutted by people who were supposed to love you, nothing about war games or logistics chaos really rattles you anymore. You just keep moving forward because stopping feels worse. I transferred to a coastal base in Virginia 6 months after the wedding imploded. New unit, new chain of command, no emotional baggage. I showed up saluted and buried myself in tasking. People described me as sharp, disciplined, no-nonsense. They weren't wrong. What they didn't know was that I went to bed most nights not knowing who I was outside the uniform. The funny part was, I didn't miss Matthew. Not really. Once the fog cleared, I realized he'd never actually been what I needed. He liked the idea of me, the uniform, the strength, the fact that I could manage myself. But he didn't know what to do with a woman who didn't need him. He wanted a partner, who would let him take the lead, not one who had to disappear for classified briefings or rewrote plans because a commanding officer called at 2 a.m. And Veronica, I didn't think about her much either. Not because I'd forgiven her, I hadn't, but because she stopped being real to me the second she looked me in the eye and lied. When someone makes you question your own perception long enough, they stop being a person. They become background noise. I built a life without them. Quiet, uncluttered. No drama, no forced holidays, no group texts. I didn't even tell my parents where I moved. I kept everything lean and sharp, just like the rest of my world. I kept things tight because messy had never served me. One night, I came back from a field exercise covered in dirt and soaked in sweat, and there was a letter waiting in my inbox. Not an email in actual envelope. Handwritten return address. From my dad. It wasn't long. A few lines about how it's time to let things go, how families fight, but they come back together. No mention of Veronica. No mention of what they let happen. Just an invitation to re-enter the same broken orbit, as if nothing had shifted. I didn't write back. I didn't rage. I didn't even save the letter. I read it once, then dropped it in the shred bin by the office copier, and never thought about it again. Instead, I kept working. I earned a promotion. Got tapped to lead a logistics overhaul project that required coordinating between multiple bases. I was trusted, respected, and left alone. It was the most peace I'd had in years. Then I met Daniel. It wasn't some storybook moment. We were both presenting at a defense summit in D.C., standing by the same terrible conference buffet. I made a sarcastic comment about the rubbery chicken. He laughed and said he was just eating it out of spite. We talked for maybe 10 minutes, then went back to our respective schedules. I didn't think much of it. I wasn't looking. 2 months later, we ran into each other again, this time at a closed-door roundtable on military procurement protocols. Sexy stuff, I know. He remembered my name. I barely remembered his. He reintroduced himself, Daniel Whitaker, Defense Strategy Consultant, former Air Force captain. Smart, dry sense of humor, zero ego. He asked if I wanted to grab coffee afterward. I said sure, mostly because he was the first man I'd spoken to in years, who didn't feel like a threat or a favor. Coffee turned into dinner. Dinner turned into emails, texts, conversations that lasted past midnight. He never pushed, never made it about himself. He'd ask how my day went, then actually listen to the answer. He never once made a joke about my rank or called me intimidating. He just respected the work and me without turning it into a performance. It was unfamiliar territory, being seen without being used. We dated quietly, no big announcements, no social media posts. I didn't tell anyone at work, and he didn't seem to care. When we decided to get married, it was simple. No big wedding, no invites, no cake tasting, just a courthouse 2 signatures and a dinner afterward where we laughed about how low maintenance we'd become. Daniel didn't marry a version of me. He married the real thing, tired, guarded, occasionally blunt. And in return, I got a man who knew when to hold space and when to push back. He didn't try to fix me. He just didn't flinch when I showed him the damage. My family never knew. I didn't tell them. They still assumed I was single, married to my career, bitter about the past. Let them build a narrative that made them feel better about what they chose. Daniel and I built something better, not flashy, not curated, just solid. People say time heals. That's not true. Time just gives you enough distance to build new walls. Healing happens when you stop looking at the wreckage and start laying bricks somewhere else. That's what I did. Brick by brick, silently with no fanfare. And no one clapping on the sidelines. Daniel never asked about my family, not in that digging therapist on a date kind of way. He knew something had gone down, obviously. You don't mention canceling a wedding and then go silent about your parents for years without sending up a few flares. But he never pressed. That was part of why I married him. He understood that not every story needs to be told to be respected. Most people think military life is all action deployments gear, adrenaline. It's not. Most of it is monotony laced with sharp pressure. Meetings that never end, logistics that fall apart, people who crack under stress in all the ways you're not allowed to. It's not glamorous. It's just a grind. But it builds something in you. Calluses, instincts, a radar for bullshit. By year 7, I had a reputation. Dependable, efficient, zero tolerance for drama. I wasn't flashy, but I got things done. I kept files clean, comms, tight people in line. I got promoted without having to campaign for it. People listened when I spoke, not because I was loud, but because I never wasted their time. Respect in the Navy is earned one brief at a time. I earned it. Meanwhile, I watched people burn out or break down or blow up their marriages. It's hard to stay intact when your life is constantly pulled in opposite directions. But I stayed steady, mostly because I didn't have anyone to disappoint anymore. I didn't miss birthdays because no one invited me. I didn't forget anniversaries because there were none. The Navy became the only relationship I had to manage. I kept things simple, no social media, no holiday visits, no emotional obligations outside of what was required by rank or regulation. The people who mattered were the people who showed up when it counted. Everyone else was background noise. Daniel became the only exception. He understood deployment's last-minute changes canceled plans. He didn't pout when I couldn't make dinner or when I went dark for 36 hours. He never made me feel like I had to explain the way the military sometimes eats your life in chunks. We made it work because we wanted to, not because we were trying to prove anything. We didn't do big gestures, no public anniversaries, no look-at-us vacations. We had one framed photo in the apartment, a blurry shot from a weekend hiking trip where I was covered in mud and he was laughing at me. It sat on a shelf next to the Wi-Fi router. That was our style. Real, low-key, ours. Work kept ramping up. I was selected for a joint task force coordinating interagency logistics for Pacific operations. It was the kind of assignment that didn't come with medals, but got noticed in the right circles. I was in briefings with people whose names appeared in congressional hearings. I signed NDAs so thick they came with tabs. I ran my unit like a machine and made sure no one had to babysit us. And still not a word from my family, which by then suited me fine. They didn't know I was married. They didn't know I'd moved twice. They didn't know I'd briefed people with stars on their collars and been trusted with material that didn't exist on paper. As far as they were concerned, I was still the backup daughter, the one who didn't send Christmas cards. Let them. Veronica had taken up real estate in some suburban development outside Charlotte. Her social media, which I hadn't looked at in years, was a mix of charity luncheons, matching family outfits, and beach selfies with Matthew, who now had just enough of a beer gut to show through his fitted polos. The house was big. The smiles were forced. The captions were full of phrases like, "So blessed," and "surround yourself with people who lift you up." I never saw my name in any of those posts. But the part that surprised me wasn't that they'd moved on, it was how easy it was to stop caring. I didn't wish them ill. I didn't check for signs that their marriage was crumbling. I didn't fantasize about revenge or justice or karma. I just didn't need anything from them anymore. Not their approval, not their apology, not even their recognition. I had everything I needed: a partner who didn't flinch when I showed up in full uniform with a week's worth of dirt on my boots, a career that rewarded results over politics, a life that was mine. No borrowed space, no borrowed confidence, no trying to prove I was enough. And the Navy. The Navy gave me something my family never did: a clear structure. A place where effort was measured, not assumed, where promotions were earned, not handed out to whoever cried louder or charmed better. One morning, I was reviewing a transport manifest when my XO walked into my office with a printed envelope. Came in this morning by courier. Personal. I opened it without thinking. Inside was an invitation gold-trimmed engraved. Summit of Defense and Innovation. Invitation only. 1-week leadership event at a private mountain resort. Guest list limited to top military leaders and strategic industry partners. I blinked. The kind of people who attended this event. They didn't invite themselves. They got invited. And not for being polite. My XO grinned. You're on their radar. I didn't smile back, but my chest got a little tighter in the way that only happens when something finally cracks open from the inside. I nodded. Thanks. I'll review it later. And I did. That night. Sitting on my living room floor with a cup of tea and Daniel's sock half under the couch. I read every word, the itinerary, the guest list, the dress code, the location. It all felt so far from where I started, from cheap chairs at family barbecues, where I was always the one getting asked, "So are you dating anyone yet?" And now I had an invitation to the kind of room Veronica never even knew existed. I didn't RSVP right away. The invitation sat on my desk for a full week while I buried myself in taskings and excuses. I told Daniel I wasn't sure if I wanted to go. It's all networking and small talk, I said. A bunch of suits congratulating each other. He didn't push. He just nodded and said, "You've earned your seat. If you go, don't go for them. Go for you." And that was it. One sentence. Calm, no pressure, no ego. Just like him. I booked the trip. The resort was nestled in the mountains, miles from anything resembling cell reception. You had to be vetted just to get through the gate. The room they gave me had a view of a lake so still it looked artificial. My name was printed on everything from the welcome folder to the event badge, Lieutenant Commander Allison Reed, U.S. Navy. I kept my uniform packed. Civilian attire only. The whole thing was designed to look relaxed, but anyone with half a brain knew it was a power summit with cocktails. The first day was a blur of handshakes, polite nods, and the same 5 industry phrases repeated like a language no one wanted to translate. I kept it brief with most people, smiled, listened, moved on. No need to impress anyone. I wasn't here to sell a persona. I already had the clearance, the rank, the track record. By the second evening, I was in a small discussion circle about defense procurement logistics, when I heard a voice I hadn't heard in 10 years, that fake bright honey slick tone that used to get her out of parking tickets and into every VIP room she wanted. Alice and I turned. Veronica was standing 3 feet away, holding a glass of wine in one hand and Matthew's arm in the other. She looked polished, expensive, a little more frozen around the eyes than I remembered. Botox, probably. Matthew looked older, softer, like he'd lost a little height under the weight of whatever image they'd built. I didn't blink. "Veronica!" Her face twitched, not quite a flinch, just the kind of shift someone makes when they expect to be met with heat but get ice instead. Matthew nodded like we were old coworkers. "Wow. This is unexpected." I didn't bother with small talk. Didn't realize contractors got invited to this. He chuckled awkwardly. "We're partnering on some strategic consulting, a few high-profile projects." Veronica jumped in. "And I'm helping with communications. You know me, always multitasking." She looped her arm tighter around his, like a handbag she didn't want to drop. I sipped my drink and gave a polite smile. "Sounds like a full plate." They were waiting for something. A reaction, an apology, a crack. Something to prove that I was still the girl they left behind. I gave them nothing. Veronica leaned in, fake casual. "Are you here with anyone?" I let the question sit in the air long enough to be uncomfortable. "Just me this round. My husband's flying in tomorrow." Her eyes twitched. "Just slightly." "Oh. I didn't know you were married. I don't update you." Matthew shifted his weight. He looked like he wanted to say something, but she got there first. "You look good," she offered, like it cost her. "You too," I lied. They moved on a minute later. Said they had to meet someone at the terrace. I nodded and watched them walk away, like strangers who used to share a bathroom sink. The next morning, during a breakfast panel, I caught any of them watching me from across the room. Veronica leaned in and whispered something to Matthew, who gave a flat smile. Whatever they thought they were walking into, it clearly wasn't this. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't cold. I wasn't a victim. I was just fine. And that seemed to bother them more than if I'd thrown a drink in their faces. At lunch, I was seated 2 tables away from them, mid-conversation, with a tech director from Lockheed, when I heard Veronica's voice again, not talking to me, just talking loud enough to carry. I just don't know how people do it. Dedicate their whole lives to work and have nothing waiting for them at home. Seems lonely, doesn't it? The words were aimed like darts, but they didn't land. I didn't flinch. I just kept talking about procurement timelines, while the table around her politely ignored the dig. No one clapped back. No one laughed. The only sound was her own voice, hanging there like a bad perfume. An hour later, I was on a walking path near the main lodge when Matthew caught up to me alone. No whine, no fake smile. "Allison!" he said, breathless like he'd jogged. "Can we talk for a second? I kept walking." "You are. I didn't come here to... we didn't expect... You didn't expect me to be here," I finished for him. He swallowed hard. "Yeah. Why?" "Because I was supposed to fade out, stay single, stay military and small." He rubbed his jaw. "That's not what I meant. It's what you thought." He didn't deny it. I stopped walking and faced him. "Let me make this easy. Whatever guilt you think I'm here to forgive, I'm not. Whatever closure you're hoping for, I've already had it. 10 years ago." He looked smaller up close. Not shorter, just less. "I'm glad you're doing well," he said, voice low. "I know." I left him standing there, hands in his pockets, staring at the trees, like the answer might be written in the leaves. Veronica didn't say anything to me for the rest of the day, but she watched. She watched when people came up to shake my hand. She watched when I spoke during a round table and the moderator asked for my insights twice. She watched when I laughed, actually laughed at something someone said. She watched like a woman who realized she didn't win anything, and that more than any speech or confrontation was enough. The next evening was the formal dinner suits, dresses, name cards, and centerpieces that looked like they cost more than my first car. I wore a black sleeveless dress, simple but sharp. Daniel had picked it, said it looked like something that didn't try to impress, but couldn't help it anyway. I added a pair of earrings he gave me on our last anniversary. Nothing flashy, just enough to say I hadn't been living under a rock for 10 years. I walked into the dining hall alone. Daniel's flight had been delayed. Mechanical issue. He texted, "I'll be there before dessert. Order me a steak if the may are not stingy." I smiled when I read it. He always knew how to keep things grounded. Veronica and Matthew were already seated when I got to my table. She wore red, bold, dramatic, the kind of dress meant to say I'm still the main character. His tie matched. "Of course it did. They saw me." She gave a tight smile. He didn't. I took my seat without acknowledging either of them. I spent the first 20 minutes talking to a retired Marine colonel who now consulted on supply chain modernization. He was sharp, funny, and didn't flinch when I mentioned classified logistics issues, like someone who actually understood the stakes. Across the room, Veronica watched me like I'd stolen her seat at the table. She thought only she deserved. When the first course came out, she made her move. She stood glass in hand and started walking toward the podium where someone from the event committee was mid-sentence. Not interrupting exactly, just hovering in that way people do when they want the spotlight, but don't want to be seen asking for it. The moment the speaker stepped down, Veronica took her place without being introduced. "Hi, everyone," she said with a practiced laugh. "Sorry, I just wanted to take a quick second to say how honored I am to be here among such incredible minds. I know I'm not in uniform or a contractor, but as someone who's been lucky enough to support and partner with many of the people in this room, I just wanted to acknowledge the hard work that goes unseen." She smiled like she'd rehearsed that line in the mirror. My husband and I are passionate about strengthening the connection between private and public sectors. We believe collaboration is the future of national defense, and community starts with us. Polite applause. The kind people give when you're not sure if they should be clapping. Veronica looked straight at me as she said, "We're proud to represent not just the business side of defense, but the family side. Because behind every strong system is a strong partnership." Then she stepped down and made her way back to her seat like she hadn't just tried to claim moral high ground on a mountain she didn't build. The colonel next to me leaned in and muttered, "Who the hell was that?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. 10 minutes later, the doors opened at the back of the room, and Daniel walked in. He didn't make a scene, didn't raise his voice or call attention to himself. He just scanned the room, found me, and made his way over like a man who knew exactly where he belonged. People noticed, not because of how he looked, though he wore a dark suit better than most, but because of how people responded. Heads turned. A few hands reached out as he passed. The chair of one of the largest aerospace firms actually stood to shake his hand. Daniel didn't stop. He just nodded respectfully and kept walking until he reached me. He leaned down, kissed my cheek, and said, "Sorry I'm late. Plane needed babysitting." "You made it," I said. "Wouldn't miss it." I pulled out the seat beside me. He sat down, adjusted his jacket, and looked across the room right at Veronica and Matthew. I didn't have to say a word. He already knew who they were. He nodded once in their direction, calm and unfazed, then turned his attention back to me. "How's the food? Overcooked but expensive?" He smirked. "Sounds about right." I watched Veronica out of the corner of my eye. Her smile was stuck, tight, forced. She whispered something to Matthew, who didn't respond. He was watching Daniel, not with envy, with recognition. The kind that said, "Oh, that's who you married." The rest of dinner passed like a well-executed operation, quiet, efficient, no wasted movement. Daniel charmed the colonel next to me with a story about a failed procurement deal that nearly stranded a battalion in Kuwait. I laughed more in that hour than I had in weeks. Across the room, Veronica barely touched her food. When the dessert plates were cleared, Daniel leaned in and said, "So do we let them stew or do we say hello?" I raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" He smiled. "I've been waiting 10 years to meet your biggest fans." We stood up together, calm, polished, not as a statement, but as a reality. Crossing the room felt like walking downhill. No tension, no heat, just inevitability. Veronica saw us first. Her eyes flicked from my face to Daniel's, to the hand resting casually at my waist. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. I stopped at their table. Daniel extended a hand. "Daniel Whitaker, Allison's husband." "Nice to finally meet you both." Matthew stood automatically, shook his hand. Quiet, respectful. Veronica stayed seated. Her fingers tightened around the stem of her wine glass. Daniel glanced at her. "I've heard so much." She smiled or tried to. "I didn't know you'd be here." He gave her a polite nod. "And yet here we are. I didn't add anything. I didn't need to." The silence said it all. We stayed there just long enough for it to be real, not performative, not spiteful, just fact. Then we turned and walked away, leaving behind the version of me they thought still existed. Veronica didn't speak to me the next morning. She passed me in the lobby without so much as a glance, like if she didn't acknowledge me, maybe I'd vanish. Matthew nodded politely. I ignored both of them. I wasn't being dramatic, I just didn't see the point in pretending we were on speaking terms, when even small talk now felt like a lie too big to carry. Daniel had a breakfast panel that ran long, so I walked the conference floor alone, coffee in hand, listening to snippets of conversation about procurement reform and interagency collaboration. I was mid-conversation with a logistics contractor from San Diego when I noticed Veronica at a nearby table whispering to someone I recognized as a regional program director. Her voice was low but animated, full of those subtle hand gestures she used when she wanted to look engaged, but also quietly direct the flow of the room. She kept glancing over at me, not obviously just enough for it to feel intentional. I ignored it. I had better things to do than track her insecurities. Later that afternoon, during a breakout session, a young civilian analyst from a defense think tank approached me with a notebook and a nervous smile. "Hi, Commander Reed. Sorry, I know this is kind of random, but your name came up during a panel yesterday, and I was hoping I could ask you a few questions about operational bottlenecks in Pacific logistics." We stepped into a corner and talked for 20 minutes. She asked smart questions. I gave clear answers. It felt good to be treated like a subject matter expert without any undercurrent of pity or performance. When we wrapped up, she said, "I hope this isn't weird, but you're kind of a quiet legend in this space." I laughed. That's the first time I've heard those words used together. "No, seriously," she said. "I sat through a lot of panels where people name-dropped your reports. You've made an impact." That hit harder than I expected. Not because I needed validation, but because it reminded me that all those years spent grinding in silence hadn't been wasted. I wasn't invisible. I was just working in a space that didn't reward noise. Back in the main hall, the vibe had shifted. People were clustering around Daniel. He stood near the bar, surrounded by a small crowd of senior officials, quietly answering questions. He wasn't flashy. He never is. But when he spoke, people leaned in. You could tell he wasn't there to be liked. He was there because he mattered. Veronica saw it too. She lingered on the edge of the group for several minutes, wine in hand, pretending to scan the room while clearly tracking every word he said. I watched her, watched the way her smile tightened every time someone laughed at something Daniel said. Watched the way Matthew stood beside her, increasingly irrelevant. At one point, she made her move. She walked over, waited for a pause, and smiled like she was posing for a magazine cover. "Daniel, right?" He turned toward her, polite but unreadable. "That's right." "I'm Veronica," she said, offering her hand. "Allison's sister." His handshake was firm, brief. "Nice to meet you." She tried to keep it light. "You're quite the celebrity around here." He raised an eyebrow. "I don't do celebrity, just the work." There was no malice in his voice, no raised volume, just that calm, centered certainty that made everything she was doing feel like theater. I walked over a minute later, slid my arm through his, and nodded at her. "Everything good here?" "Of course," she said. "Just getting to know your husband." Daniel looked at me, then back at her. "She's the best person I've ever met. You raised her right." Veronica blinked. "Sort of." He smiled. "Well, whoever shaped her, they built someone solid." She didn't know how to respond. I didn't help her. We walked away. A few hours later, during a panel on infrastructure investment, I sat near the back with Daniel. He leaned over mid-discussion and whispered, "She's unraveling." I nodded once. She's been holding on to a version of me that no longer exists. He reached for my hand under the table. Then let her grieve it. At the networking dinner that night, someone from the organizing committee stood to make a few final remarks. Just as they wrapped up, a moderator invited a few attendees to share short reflections, 90 seconds each, about what leadership meant to them in the context of defense. I wasn't planning to speak, but the moderator made eye contact and said, "Commander Reed, we'd love to hear from you." I stood. Not to prove anything, just because I knew exactly what I wanted to say. When I first joined the Navy, I said I thought leadership was about control, being the most prepared, the most informed, the most commanding presence in the room. I paused, looked around. But over time, I learned it's about steadiness. It's about consistency when the mission shifts and the people around you falter. It's about being the person others can count on. Not because you shout the loudest, but because you show up when it matters, and you don't take credit when it doesn't. There was a moment of stillness, and then applause, not roaring but solid. I returned to my seat. Daniel squeezed my hand once and didn't let go. Veronica stayed seated at the far end of the room, her wine untouched. Matthew looked like he was aging in real time. Every laugh that wasn't directed at them chipped away at the fiction they'd built. Not because anyone attacked them, but because no one needed to. The truth just stood there, silently filling the space they used to occupy. The last day of the conference started slow. People wandered into the morning sessions with coffees and name badges slightly crooked hungover from late dinners or too many back-to-back conversations. I arrived early as usual, notebook in hand, uniform sharp, even though I didn't need to wear it. Old habits. Daniel was already in the lounge talking with a project lead from NATO. I caught part of their conversation, something about satellite logistics integration, and nodded to him from across the room. He didn't wave. He just gave me that quiet look of acknowledgement we'd always used. I see you. You're good. My first session was on resilience in leadership. The irony wasn't lost on me. I sat down in a row near the back, flipping through the program schedule, when someone slid into the seat beside me without asking. Veronica. No wine glass, no smile, no practiced confidence. Just her with the same tight jaw she used to get when our parents would side with me during arguments as kids, which happened exactly twice. She didn't say anything at first, just sat there, eyes forward like she was actually here for the panel. Then she said, "You look happy." I didn't respond. "I mean it," she added. "You look different, steady." I glanced at her. "I am." Another pause. She folded her hands in her lap. Her nails were freshly done, expensive, subtle like always. The kind of details she used to think separated women like her from women like me. "I didn't expect you to build a life like this," she said. I turned toward her. Not cold, not angry. Just clear. "That's because you didn't know me. You only knew the version of me that made your spotlight shine brighter." She flinched. I think she expected venom. What she got was worse calm truth. "I didn't mean for everything to happen the way it did," she said. "You did it anyway." She looked down at her hands. "It wasn't personal." I shook my head, almost amused. "It was the most personal thing you could have done." Silence stretched between us. "I thought you'd fall apart," she said quietly. "That you'd leave the Navy, go back to some small town job, disappear." "Well, I said you weren't wrong about the disappearing part." She nodded slowly, not looking at me. "We lost a lot, didn't we?" "No," I said. "You lost a lot." "I built something." She looked like she wanted to cry, but not in a way that made me feel sorry for her. It was the cry of someone realizing the window to undo things had been closed for a long time, and she'd only just noticed. Then she said it. The one thing I never thought I'd hear come out of her mouth. "I'm sorry." It didn't come with a speech. No conditions, no excuses. Just those two words said softly, like they'd been waiting at the back of her throat for years, and finally slipped out. I nodded. Not out of forgiveness, but acknowledgement. "I'm glad you said that," I told her. "But I don't need it." That landed harder than I expected. Her face crumpled just slightly, like she realized that redemption didn't come with a round of applause. Before she could respond, someone announced the start of the session. I turned back to the stage. Veronica stayed for a minute, then quietly got up and walked out. She didn't come back. Later that afternoon, Daniel and I stepped out onto one of the terraces overlooking the valley. The wind was cool, sharp, the kind of air that wakes you up whether you're tired or not. He leaned on the railing beside me. "You good?" I nodded. "Yeah." "She talked to you?" "Yeah." He waited. "Then did it help?" I exhaled. "Not really. But I think it helped her." We stood in silence for a moment. Then I said, "You know what I realized this week?" He glanced at me. I never needed them to regret what they did. I just needed to stop thinking their version of me was the only one that mattered. Daniel didn't say anything right away. He just looked at me the way he always did, like I was already complete, not a puzzle missing pieces. "You're not who they left," he said. "I know," I replied. "And I don't miss her." That night, we packed our things, turned in our badges, and walked through the hotel lobby like any other couple heading home. Nobody stopped us. No dramatic send-off. Just two professionals quiet and certain moving forward. In the car on the way to the airport, Daniel rested his hand on mine. We didn't talk about the conference. We didn't dissect the awkward moments or relive the speeches. We talked about a home project he wanted to start, about a friend who was expecting twins, about where we might go hiking next month if my schedule allowed. Life stuff, solid stuff. The kind of things people build when they stop waiting for someone else to give them permission. By the time the plane took off, I'd already deleted the conference schedule from my calendar. And just like that, it was behind me, not buried, not rewritten, just done. If this story proves anything, it's that real revenge isn't loud. It doesn't come with public arguments or dramatic confrontations. In family revenge stories like this, the real power shows up when you stop chasing validation and start choosing boundaries. Betrayal hurts most when it comes from family, but healing happens when you build a life that no longer needs their approval. Growth isn't about proving someone wrong. It's about becoming someone who doesn't need to look back. If this family revenge story resonated with you, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Stories like this are about strength, resilience, and real-life lessons we don't talk about enough. And I'd love to have you here for the next one.